Caleb Mercer hadn't spoken to a living soul in 19 days. He liked it that way. Then a woman collapsed on his porch, 5 children clinging to her skirts, and said the only words that could crack him open. "None of them are yours, but you owe their dead father." He tried to shut the door. The smallest girl reached up and grabbed his hand. And Caleb Mercer, the man who survived Bitter Creek, who buried his own brother, who swore he'd never owe anyone again, couldn't pull away. If this story grips you, subscribe to our channel and stay until the very end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The flies were the only company Caleb Mercer kept anymore. Them and the bottle on the table, and the silence that pressed against the walls of his cabin like something alive. He sat on the porch with his boots unlaced and his jaw set against the Wyoming heat, watching dust devils spin across the flats like ghosts with nowhere to go. 19 days since he'd spoken to anyone. 23 since he'd been to town. He preferred it this way. People asked questions. People remembered things. And Caleb Mercer had spent the last 8 years trying to forget. The horse heard them first. Old Dutch lifted his head from the trough and turned his ears forward, nostrils flaring. Caleb's hand moved to the rifle propped against the porch rail before his mind caught up. Habit. The kind of habit that kept men alive on the frontier and made them useless everywhere else. He saw the dust cloud first, then shapes inside it. Small shapes, too many of them. A woman walked at the front of the group, sunburned, thin. Her dress was torn at the hem and stained dark with road dust. She carried an infant on one hip and held the hand of a girl no older than 5. Behind her, 3 more children trudged single file like soldiers on a death march. Caleb stood. She stopped at the bottom of his porch steps and looked up at him with eyes that had stopped asking for permission a long time ago. "Caleb Mercer?" "Who's asking?" "My name is Evelyn Harper. My husband was Daniel Harper." The name hit him like a fist to the sternum. He didn't show it. He'd learned not to show anything a long time ago. "Don't know him," he said. "You're lying." She said it flat. No anger, no accusation. Just the voice of a woman who had walked too many miles to tolerate a lie. "Ma'am, I think you've got the wrong ranch." "I don't." She shifted the infant to her other hip. The baby fussed once and went quiet. "Daniel talked about you before he died. He said if anything happened, I should find Caleb Mercer in the Laramie Valley. He said you'd know why." Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked past her at the children. The oldest boy, maybe 11, stared back at him with dark eyes full of something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear. Something worse. Recognition. "I can't help you," Caleb said. "I didn't ask you to help me." She climbed the first step, then the second. She stood close enough now that he could see the cracked skin on her lips, the sunburn peeling across her nose, the way her hands trembled even as her voice held steady. "None of these children are yours," she said, "but you owe their dead father, and that debt falls on them now." "I don't owe anybody anything." The oldest boy stepped forward. His voice hadn't changed yet, still high, still thin, but the words came out sharp as a blade. "You owe my father. He died carrying something that belonged to you, and men killed him for it." Silence. The kind of silence that makes the air feel heavier. Caleb looked at the boy, then at the woman, then at the 4 other children standing in his dirt yard, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the kind of exhaustion that settles into bones. "How long you been walking?" 11 days. "From where?" "Cheyenne." He did the math in his head. 11 days on foot, with 5 children, One of them, an infant. Across open prairie in July heat. No horse. No wagon. You're either brave or stupid, ma'am. I'm neither. I'm desperate. She set the infant down on the porch. The baby immediately crawled toward Caleb's boots and grabbed the leather with both fists. He looked down at the child, a girl, maybe 2 years old, with brown curls matted against her forehead, and something cracked inside him that he'd spent years sealing shut. I need water for the children, Evelyn said, and then I need to tell you what's coming. What's coming? Men, the same ones who killed Daniel. Caleb didn't move for a long moment. Then he reached down, picked up the infant, and held her against his chest. The baby grabbed his collar and pressed her face into his neck. Get inside, he said. He didn't say it kindly. He didn't say it gently. He said it the way a man says something when he knows the world just changed and he hasn't decided yet whether to fight it or run. They filed in one by one, the oldest boy last, watching the horizon before he crossed the threshold, just like a man twice his age would do. Caleb noticed. The cabin wasn't built for 7 people. It was barely built for 1. A single room with a cook stove, a table, a cot, and a chair. Caleb's life reduced to its most basic elements. No photographs on the walls, no curtains, no softness of any kind. Evelyn looked around and said nothing. The children sat on the floor against the wall. The girl called Clara, 9, sharp-eyed, quiet, studied every corner of the room as though cataloging escape routes. The boy called Samuel, 7, restless, kept touching things. The cook stove handle, the edge of the table, the grain of the wood floor. Lily, 5, the small one, pressed herself against Evelyn's leg and didn't let go. Thomas, the oldest, stood by the door. Caleb pumped water into a tin pitcher and set it on the table. He put out 5 cups. He didn't have 5 cups. He had 3, so he used 2 empty canning jars for the rest. Clara poured water for the younger ones before she drank herself. Caleb noticed that too. Start talking, he said to Evelyn. She sat at the table across from him, her hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't lifted to her lips. Daniel was a ledger keeper for the Union Pacific Land Office in Cheyenne. He kept records of property transfers, claims, ownership disputes. It was honest work, quiet work, until he found discrepancies. What kind? Land stolen from railroad widows. Women whose husbands died laying track. They were owed homestead claims, government issued. But the claims were redirected, filed under different names. Hundreds of acres, maybe thousands. Redirected to who? A man named Silas Boone. Caleb's hand tightened around his cup. Evelyn watched him. You know the name. I know the name. Daniel made a duplicate of the ledger, the original records, proof of every stolen claim. He was going to send it to the Federal Land Office in Washington. She paused. He never got the chance. They killed him. They found us on the road outside of Laramie. 3 riders. They searched the wagon, tore apart everything we owned. Daniel told me to run with the children. I heard the gunshots from the tree line. She said this without tears, without trembling. The way someone describes something that happened so long ago, it is calcified into fact. When did this happen? 6 weeks ago. And you've been running since. I've been surviving since. There's a difference. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Why me? Why did Daniel say to find me? Because you served with Daniel's brother at Bitter Creek. His brother was James Harper. The name landed like a second blow, harder than the first. James, Caleb said quietly. James gave Daniel something before the battle, a sealed envelope. Daniel never opened it. He told me if anything ever went wrong, I should find the man James trusted most. James trusted the wrong man. Maybe, but he trusted you enough to die for you. The words hung in the hot air of the cabin. Thomas spoke from the doorway. Ma told me the story. Your squad was ambushed at Bitter Creek. James Harper drew fire so the rest of you could retreat. He didn't make it back. I know what happened at Bitter Creek, boy. I was there. Then you know what my uncle did for you. Caleb stood so fast the chair scraped against the floor. He walked to the window and put his back to all of them. Evelyn said softly, "Caleb, don't. He didn't have to save you, but he did. And now his brother's children are sitting in your cabin with nowhere else to go." "That's not my problem." Clara's voice, thin, precise, and terrifyingly calm for a 9-year-old, cut through the room. "Mister, we watched our father get shot off a wagon. We walked for 11 days. Lily hasn't spoken a word since Cheyenne. Ruth doesn't cry anymore because she forgot how. You can say we're not your problem, but we're sitting in your house. So what are you going to do about it?" Nobody spoke. Caleb turned around and looked at the girl. She looked back. She didn't blink. "You've got your father's mouth," he said. "I've got my mother's spine." Despite everything, Caleb almost smiled. Almost. He sat back down. He looked at Evelyn. "Where's the ledger?" "Daniel hid it before they caught us. I know the general area, but I need time to find it. And I need the children somewhere safe while I look." "You want to leave them here?" "I want to leave them with the only man Silas Boone is afraid of." "Boone isn't afraid of me." "Then why hasn't he come to Laramie Valley in 8 years?" Caleb didn't answer. Evelyn stood. She touched each child's head as she moved toward the door. Thomas, Clara, Samuel, Lily. She kissed Ruth's forehead, the infant already asleep on the floor on Caleb's folded blanket. "I'll be back in 3 days." "And if you're not?" She stopped at the door. She looked at him with those burned, exhausted, unbreakable eyes. "Then you'll know Boone found me first, and you'll know what to do." She walked out. Caleb stood in the doorway and watched her cross the yard, climb through the fence, and disappear into the heat shimmer on the road. 5 children behind him, a dead man's debt in front of him. And somewhere out there, Silas Boone, the man Caleb had been hiding from for 8 years, was riding closer. Thomas appeared beside him. "She's not coming back in 3 days," the boy said. "What makes you say that?" "Because she told me goodbye this morning. Not, see you soon. Goodbye." Caleb looked down at the boy, 11 years old, eyes that had seen too much, jaw set the way James Harper used to set his before a fight. "Can you shoot?" Caleb asked. "My father taught me." "Can you hit anything?" "I can hit what needs hitting." Caleb nodded slowly. He looked back at the empty road. The dust had settled. The heat pressed down. Somewhere in the cabin, Samuel was asking Clara if there was any food. "Then we've got work to do," Caleb said. He closed the door, but he didn't lock it. Some doors, once opened, aren't meant to close again. By nightfall, Caleb had rearranged the cabin in ways he hadn't thought himself capable of. He gave the cot to the younger children. Lily and Ruth slept on it together, tangled like kittens. Samuel took the floor beside them with a folded saddle blanket. Clara insisted on sleeping near the door, and when Caleb asked why, she said, "Someone has to hear them coming." Thomas slept on the porch with the rifle Caleb gave him. "It's not loaded," Caleb told him. "I know." "Then why do you want it?" "Because they don't know it's not loaded." Caleb studied the boy in the dying light. "Your Uncle James used to say the same thing," Thomas didn't answer. He just positioned himself against the porch post, the rifle across his knees, and stared out at the darkness like he'd been doing it his whole life. Caleb sat inside at the table with the lamp turned low. He opened the bottle, poured a measure, stared at it. He thought about James Harper, Bitter Creek, the sound of gunfire in a canyon, James yelling, "Go!" and turning back toward the smoke. The last time Caleb saw his face. 8 years. 8 years of drinking to forget. 8 years of silence. 8 years of telling himself that the debt was paid because he survived. But debts don't die with the dead. They pass down. They find you. They show up on your porch with 5 children and cracked lips and eyes that won't look away. He poured the whiskey on the floor. Then he blew out the lamp and sat in the dark, listening to 5 children breathe. Morning came hard and bright. Caleb woke to the sound of Samuel trying to light the cook stove and failing. The boy was blowing on a spark that had already died, his cheeks puffed out, his eyes watering from smoke. "You're smothering it," Caleb said from the doorway. Samuel jumped. "I was trying to make breakfast." "With what?" The boy looked around the empty cabin. "I figured you had something." Caleb almost laughed. He didn't, but he almost did. He walked to the root cellar behind the cabin and came back with salt pork, dried beans, and 6 eggs he'd been saving for no particular reason. Clara appeared and took the eggs from his hands without asking. "I'll cook. You don't have a clean pan." "I have a pan." "You have a pan with 3 days of grease in it." "That's seasoning." Clara looked at him the way her mother had looked at him the night before, with the kind of patience that was really just controlled frustration. She scrubbed the pan. She cooked the eggs. She divided them evenly among the children, giving herself the smallest portion. Caleb noticed. He pushed his plate toward her. "Eat." "I'm fine." "You're 9 years old and you've been walking for 11 days. Eat the eggs, Clara." She ate. Thomas came in from the porch. "Riders." The word changed everything. Caleb was at the window in 2 steps. He saw them on the ridge. 3 figures, maybe 4, silhouetted against the morning sun. Too far to identify, close enough to be a threat. "Could be drovers," Caleb said. "Drovers don't sit on ridgelines and watch," Thomas said. The boy was right. "Get the children away from the windows," Caleb said. "Clara, take Lily and Ruth to the root cellar. Samuel, go with them." "I want to stay," Samuel said. "Root cellar, now." Samuel went. Clara gathered the little ones with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. Too many times before. Thomas stood beside Caleb at the window. "They're counting," the boy said. "Counting what?" "Horses? Exits? How many of us there are?" Caleb looked at him. "Your father teach you that too?" "No, sir. I learned that the night they killed him." The riders didn't come down. They watched for 20 minutes, then turned and rode east. Caleb exhaled. But he didn't relax. "They'll be back," Thomas said. "I know." "What are we going to do?" Caleb looked at the boy. This 11-year-old who stood like a soldier and spoke like a man and carried grief on his shoulders the way other children carried school books. "We're going to be ready," Caleb said. He walked to the barn. Thomas followed. Beneath the hay in the far stall, Caleb pulled out a wooden crate. Inside, 2 Colt revolvers, a Winchester repeater, a box of ammunition, and a leather satchel he hadn't opened in 8 years. He opened the satchel. Inside was a letter. Sealed. James Harper's handwriting on the front. For Caleb Mercer. To be opened when the debt comes due. Caleb stared at it. Thomas stood behind him. "What is it?" "Something I should have opened a long time ago." He broke the seal. The letter was short. James Harper's handwriting. Sharp, slanted. The penmanship of a man who wrote fast because he never knew how much time he had left. Caleb, if you're reading this, I didn't make it. Don't waste time on guilt. My brother Daniel has something important. Protect him. Protect his family. Boone will come for what Daniel knows. You're the only man I trust to stand when it matters. You owe me nothing, but you owe the world a better man than you've been. Be that man. James. Caleb folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket, over his heart.
"What did it say?" Thomas asked.
It said your uncle knew me better than I know myself. He handed Thomas the Winchester.
"I thought you said it wasn't loaded."
I lied. Thomas took the rifle. He held it properly, stock against his shoulder, finger off the trigger, barrel pointed at the ground, exactly the way a man teaches his son. "They're coming back," Caleb said. "Boone's men, maybe Boone himself. And when they come, they're not going to ask nicely."
"I know."
"I need you to protect your brother and sisters if I can't."
"I will."
"I need you to be scared and do it anyway." Thomas looked up at him.
"My father said courage isn't about not being scared."
"Your father was a smart man."
"He was a dead man. Smart didn't save him."
The words hit Caleb like a physical blow, because the boy was right. Smart didn't save Daniel Harper, and brave didn't save James Harper, and drinking didn't save Caleb Mercer from the truth he'd been running from for 8 years. Some debts can't be paid with money or whiskey or silence. Some debts can only be paid by standing in the doorway when the riders come back. Caleb loaded both Colts. He filled his pockets with ammunition. He walked back to the cabin and set one revolver on the table. Clara looked at it. "Do you know how to use that?" Caleb asked her. "Point and pull," she said. "Close enough. Don't touch it unless someone comes through that door who isn't me or your brother." Clara nodded. No fear, no tears. Just the nod of a girl who understood exactly what the world was and had decided to survive it anyway. Caleb stepped onto the porch. The morning sun was already brutal. The ridge where the riders had sat was empty now. But empty didn't mean safe. Empty just meant they were repositioning. He sat down in his chair. He put his boots up on the rail. He tipped his hat down over his eyes. And he waited. Because Silas Boone was coming. And this time, Caleb Mercer wasn't going to run. 3 days passed. Evelyn didn't come back. Caleb didn't say anything about it. Neither did Thomas. But Clara watched the road every morning from the kitchen window while she cooked breakfast. And every morning, her eyes stayed a little longer on the empty horizon before she turned back to the stove. Samuel asked on the second day, "When's Mama coming?" Clara answered before Caleb could. "Soon." "You don't know that," Samuel said. "I know Mama. That's enough." It wasn't enough. They both knew it. But Samuel nodded and went back to trying to whittle a stick with a dull knife. And Clara went back to the eggs. And the lie sat between them like a guest nobody wanted to acknowledge. Caleb spent those 3 days doing what he knew how to do. He reinforced the cabin door with a crossbeam. He dug a shallow trench behind the water trough, enough cover for a man lying flat. He counted ammunition twice. 47 rounds for the Winchester, 24 for each Colt. Not enough for a siege, enough for a fight. Thomas helped without being asked. The boy moved like someone who understood that work was the only answer to fear. He carried water. He stacked firewood against the south wall, not for burning, but for cover. He cleaned the Winchester every night and set it beside his sleeping spot on the porch. On the third night, Caleb found Clara sitting alone at the table after the others had fallen asleep. She had Ruth in her lap, The baby's face pressed against her chest, and she was rocking slowly, staring at the wall. "You should sleep," Caleb said. "Ruth won't settle." "Give her to me." Clara looked up at him. Something shifted in her expression. Suspicion giving way to something fragile. Something she didn't want to feel. "She'll cry." Then she cries. Clara handed the baby over. Ruth fussed once, grabbed Caleb's shirt collar, and went quiet. She was asleep in under a minute. Clara stared. "How'd you do that?" "I didn't do anything.
She doesn't go to strangers. She screams."
Caleb looked down at the sleeping infant. Her fist was balled up in his collar so tight he'd have to pry her fingers loose to set her down. "Maybe I'm not a stranger anymore," he said. Clara's chin trembled. Just once. Then she set her jaw the way her mother did and stood up. "Good night, Mr. Mercer." "Caleb." She paused at the doorway. "Good night, Caleb." She disappeared into the dark corner where she slept. Caleb sat at the table, holding a dead man's baby, listening to 5 children breathe in a cabin that had been silent for 8 years. He didn't sleep that night either. Morning came with trouble. Caleb was checking the fence line when Thomas sprinted from the porch, breathless. "Rider coming! 1 man! Fast!" Caleb grabbed the Winchester and moved to the front of the cabin. He could feel the hoofbeats through the ground before he heard them. 1 horse, hard gallop, coming from the direction of town. The rider broke through the heat haze, and Caleb recognized the slouch hat and the bay mare before he recognized the man. Hector Doyle. Ran the general store in Lander. Drank too much. Talked too much. Owed Caleb $14 for a fence repair he'd never paid. Hector pulled up in a cloud of dust, his horse lathered and heaving. "Mercer!" "Hector, you got trouble." "I know." "No, you don't. You think you know, but you don't." Hector swung down from the saddle. His hands were shaking. "Silas Boone rode into Lander yesterday. 8 men with him. Armed heavy. He's been asking about you." Caleb's stomach turned, but his face didn't change. "What's he asking?" "Where your ranch is. How many guns you got. Whether you got company." Hector wiped sweat from his face with a filthy sleeve. "Mercer, he's asking about children. He asked the sheriff if anybody'd seen a woman with 5 children heading toward the valley."
What'd the sheriff say?
"What do you think? Crawford told him everything. Where your ranch sits, how to get here, that you live alone." Hector paused. "Crawford also told him you were at Bitter Creek." "Crawford's a coward." "Crawford's practical. Boone's got money and guns. You've got a rundown ranch and a drinking problem." "I quit drinking." Hector blinked. "Since when?" 3 days ago." "Hell of a time to get sober." Thomas stepped off the porch. Hector stared at the boy holding a Winchester that was almost as tall as he was. "That one of them?" Hector asked quietly. "Yeah." "How many?" 5. Youngest is 2. Hector swore under his breath. He looked at the cabin, then at the horizon, then back at Caleb. Something was working behind his eyes, the calculation of a man deciding how much trouble he could afford. "Boone said something else," Hector said. "He said you have something that belongs to him. He said he's willing to pay for it.
And if you won't sell, he's willing to take. I don't have what he's looking for."
"He thinks you do. Then he's wrong. Being wrong hasn't stopped Silas Boone from killing people before." Hector climbed back on his horse. "I came because I owe you for that fence. We're square now." "We're square." Hector turned the mare. Then he stopped. Without looking back, he said, "There's a woman in the jailhouse. Crawford picked her up yesterday on the Cheyenne Road. Said she was trespassing on Boone's land. She matched the description Boone gave.
Thin, sunburned, traveling alone. Caleb's blood went cold.
Evelyn.
I don't know her name. I know she's in a cell, and Boone's men are standing outside the jailhouse door.
Hector rode away without another word.
Thomas was already beside Caleb.
That's Mama.
We don't know that.
It's Mama. You know it, and I know it.
Caleb looked at the boy.
Thomas's hands were white-knuckled on the rifle stock, and his jaw was clenched so tight Caleb could see the muscles jumping. But his eyes were steady.
I'm going with you, Thomas said.
No.
She's my mother.
And those 4 in there are your brothers and sisters. Somebody has to stay. Thomas opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at the cabin door, where Clara stood watching them. Lily pressed against her hip.
If you don't bring her back,
Thomas said, his voice cracking for the first time since he'd arrived,
I'll go get her myself.
I'll bring her back.
Promise me.
Caleb put his hand on the boy's shoulder. He could feel the trembling Thomas was trying to hide. I promise. It was the first promise Caleb Mercer had made in 8 years. He intended to keep it. He saddled Old Dutch in 4 minutes, shoved the loaded Colt into his belt, took the second Colt and handed it to Thomas. Loaded this time, Caleb said.
I know.
Clara knows where the root cellar is. If anybody rides up that isn't me, cellar, all of them. I cover the entrance. Caleb nodded. The boy had a soldier's instincts and a child's face, and it broke something in Caleb's chest that he didn't have time to examine. He rode. Old Dutch was 14 years old and half-retired, but the horse remembered what urgency felt like. They covered the 9 miles to Lander in under an hour, the heat hammering down, dust coating Caleb's throat. He slowed to a walk at the edge of town. Lander wasn't much. A main street of packed dirt, a row of false front buildings, a saloon, a general store, a church with a crooked steeple. The kind of town that existed because somebody had to live somewhere. He saw them immediately. 2 men outside the jailhouse, young, armed, sitting in chairs tipped back against the wall with the lazy confidence of men who knew they worked for the most dangerous person in the territory. Caleb tied Dutch to the rail outside the saloon. He didn't go to the jailhouse. He went to the saloon. It was nearly empty. Midday. Too hot for drinking, even for the dedicated. The bartender, a thick man named Willis, looked up and froze. "Mercer, haven't seen you in—" "Where's Crawford?" "Sheriff's office. But listen, is there a woman in the jail?" Willis set down the glass he was wiping. "You don't want to go over there." "I didn't ask what I want. I asked if there's a woman in the jail." "There is. Brought in yesterday. No charges filed. Crawford's holding her as what'd he call it? A precautionary measure." "Precautionary for who?" Willis didn't answer. He didn't need to. Caleb turned for the door. "Mercer?" Willis's voice dropped. "Boone isn't here right now. He rode out this morning, but he'll be back by sundown. Those 2 outside the jail? They're nothing. But Boone left 4 more at the hotel, and they're not nothing. I appreciate the count. I'm not trying to help you. I'm trying to keep blood off my street." Caleb walked out and crossed the street toward the jailhouse. The 2 guards saw him coming and straightened. One of them put his hand on his holster. "Help you?" the taller one said. "Here to see the sheriff." "Sheriff's busy." "He's about to get busier." Caleb walked past them. The tall one grabbed his arm. Caleb stopped, looked at the hand on his arm, then looked at the man's face. "Son," Caleb said quietly, "I've killed better men than you on worse days than this. Take your hand off me." The hand came off. Caleb pushed through the door. Crawford sat behind his desk, sweating into his collar,
looking like a man who'd swallowed something rancid and couldn't bring it back up. He was 50, thin, with the nervous eyes of someone who'd taken a job for the badge and discovered too late what the badge cost. "Mercer, I don't want trouble." "Then you shouldn't have locked up an innocent woman. She was on Boone's land."
Since when does Boone own the Cheyenne Road?
"Since he bought every parcel between here and Fort Fetterman, legal and proper." "Nothing Boone does is legal and proper, and you know it." Crawford stood. "What I know is that man has 8 armed riders and a territorial judge in his pocket. What I know is you're one man with a grudge and a reputation. What I know is I have a town to protect. You have a woman locked in a cell to protect a land thief. I have a woman locked in a cell because if I didn't, Boone's men would have taken her themselves. You think about that before you judge me." That stopped Caleb. He studied Crawford's face, the sweat, the shame, the defiance that was really just dressed-up fear. "You're protecting her," Caleb said slowly. "I'm keeping her alive. There's a difference." "Let me see her." Crawford hesitated. Then he pulled a keyring from his desk and walked to the back of the office, where a single iron-barred cell sat against the stone wall.
Evelyn sat on the cot. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Her lip was split. But when she saw Caleb, she stood straight, and her eyes burned with something that wasn't relief. It was fury. "Took you long enough," she said. "You're welcome." "I didn't thank you. I said you're slow." Crawford unlocked the cell. Evelyn walked out, straightened her dress, and faced Caleb. "Did you find it?" he asked. "I found it." "Where is it?" "Hidden. Somewhere Boone's men didn't check, because men never think women are smart enough to hide things properly." Crawford shifted nervously. "If this is about the ledger Boone's been tearing up the territory looking for—" "You know about the ledger?" Caleb said. "Everybody knows about the ledger. Boone's been offering $500 for it. That's more money than most people in this town make in 2 years. Crawford wiped his face. "I don't want any part of it." "You're already part of it. You locked her up." "I kept her alive." Crawford's voice broke. He caught himself, lowered his volume. "Listen to me, Mercer. Boone comes back tonight. When he finds out she's gone, he's riding straight to your ranch. And this time, he won't send scouts. He'll come himself." "Good." "Good? You've lost your mind." "Maybe. But I've also got something Boone wants. And as long as I have it, he has to come to me, instead of hunting a woman and 5 children across open prairie." Evelyn touched his arm. "The children, are they?" "They're fine. Thomas is standing guard with a loaded rifle, and Clara's running the household better than I ever did." Something cracked in Evelyn's composure, just for a moment. Her eyes filled, her breath caught, and she pressed her hand against her mouth. Then she pulled it together the way she always did, fast, clean, like folding laundry. "We need to go," she said. "We need to do something first." Caleb turned to Crawford. "I need you to send a wire." "To who?" "Federal Marshal's office in Cheyenne. Address it to Marshal James Redding." "You know Redding?" "Rode with him at Bitter Creek. He's the only law in this territory Boone can't buy." Crawford shook his head. "Mercer, if I send that wire and Boone finds out—" "If you don't send that wire, Boone wins. He keeps the land. The widows get nothing. And you spend the rest of your life knowing you helped him do it." Crawford stood there, caught between 2 different kinds of fear. The fear of Boone, and the fear of what he'd become if he let Boone win. Evelyn stepped forward. "Sheriff, my husband was murdered for trying to do the right thing. He was an accountant. He couldn't ride, couldn't shoot, couldn't fight. But he copied that ledger because those widows deserved their land. He died for it.
The least you can do is send a telegram." Crawford looked at her for a long time. Then he sat down, pulled a telegraph form from his desk, and began to write.
"Get out of my town, Mercer, both of you, before sunset." They didn't need to be told twice. Caleb put Evelyn on Dutch and walked beside the horse through town. People watched from windows and doorways. Nobody spoke. Nobody helped. But an old woman outside the dry goods store pressed a bundle of cloth into Evelyn's hands as they passed. Bread and dried meat wrapped in a clean dish towel.
"For the children," the old woman whispered.
Evelyn gripped her hand.
"Thank you. Don't thank me. Just go fast."
They went fast. 2 miles out of town, Evelyn finally spoke.
"I found the ledger, Caleb. Daniel buried it inside a fence post at the old relay station south of the pass, wrapped in oilcloth. Every record, every stolen claim. 47 widows, 47 families robbed."
47.
Boone didn't just steal land. He forged death certificates. Some of those women's husbands weren't even dead when he filed.
He had railroad foremen list men as killed in accidents, then seized the homestead claims before the wives even knew. And Daniel found all this? Daniel was a careful man. He kept copies of everything. He cross-referenced every claim with the original railroad employment rolls. It's airtight. A federal judge couldn't ignore it. That's why Boone killed him. That's why Boone will kill us all if he gets the chance. They walked in silence for a while. The heat was punishing. Caleb took his hat and put it on Evelyn's head. She didn't protest. "How bad did they hurt you?" he asked without looking at her. "Not bad enough to slow me down." "Evelyn." "One of Boone's riders caught me at the relay station. He knocked me around before Crawford's deputy rode up. The deputy brought me to the jail. I think Crawford told his deputy to follow me, actually, to get to me before Boone's men did. Crawford's got more spine than I gave him credit for. Crawford's got a daughter the same age as Clara. I think that's what made the difference." When they crested the final ridge and the ranch came into view, Caleb saw Thomas standing on the porch with the rifle. The boy had been standing there for hours. Caleb could tell by the way his shoulders sagged with exhaustion, even as his grip stayed firm. Thomas saw Evelyn, and the rifle dropped. He ran. Caleb had never seen the boy run before. Thomas had moved with the deliberate care of someone who believed running showed weakness. But he ran now, flat out, arms pumping, boots kicking up dust. And when he reached his mother, he threw his arms around her waist and buried his face in her dress. He didn't cry, but his shoulders shook. Evelyn held him. She put her cheek against the top of his head and closed her eyes. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm here." Clara appeared in the doorway, then Samuel, then Lily, who hadn't spoken since Cheyenne, who hadn't made a sound in weeks. Lily looked at her mother and said, "Mama." One word, barely a whisper, but it hit like thunder. Evelyn dropped to her knees and gathered Lily into her arms. Clara knelt beside them. Samuel piled on. Thomas stood back, watching, the rifle forgotten in the dirt, his face working through emotions he was too young to name and too old to ignore. Ruth crawled out the door, reached the edge of the porch, and began to wail. The honest, furious wail of a 2-year-old who'd been left out of something important. Caleb picked her up. He stood on the edge of the circle, not inside it, not quite, holding a baby who grabbed his collar and screamed into his neck, watching a family rebuild itself in his front yard. He didn't belong in that circle. He knew it. But Ruth's fist was tight in his shirt, and she wasn't letting go. That night, after the children were finally asleep, all of them inside now, all of them close,
Evelyn sat across the table from Caleb and told him the rest.
Boone served in the war, Confederate irregular, Quantrill's outfit. After the surrender, he came west and started buying land with stolen military pay. He's been building his territory for 10 years. The railroad gave him cover. He'd buy up claims from widows at pennies on the dollar, using forged documents to prove the land was already his. Most of those women couldn't read. The ones who could were too scared to fight. And Daniel found the pattern. Daniel found everything. He was quiet and careful, and he noticed things other people missed. Her voice tightened. He wasn't brave, Caleb. Not the way you mean brave. He didn't carry a gun. He didn't ride into danger. He couldn't look at those numbers and do nothing. He said, "Somebody has to say something." And I told him to let it go. I told him it wasn't worth dying for. She stopped. Her hands were flat on the table, pressing hard, as if she could hold herself steady through sheer pressure. I was wrong. You were trying to protect your family. I was trying to protect my comfort. There's a difference. She looked at him. Daniel knew Boone would come. That's why he sent me to you. Not because you're brave, not because you're fast with a gun. Because James told him you were the kind of man who does the right thing when it costs you everything. James was wrong about me. Was he? You've got 5 children sleeping in your house. You rode 9 miles to pull me out of a jail cell. You gave your bed to strangers and slept on the floor for 3 nights. She leaned forward. James wasn't wrong. You just spent 8 years trying to prove him wrong. And you failed. Caleb stared at her. Nobody had spoken to him like that since James Harper died. Boone's coming tomorrow, he said. I know. He'll bring everything he has. I know. I can't fight 8 men alone. You won't be alone. You, me, and an 11-year-old with a Winchester. That's not exactly an army. Evelyn reached across the table and put her hand over his. Her skin was rough and warm, and her grip was stronger than he expected. Daniel wasn't a fighter, but he fought. I'm not a soldier, but I'll stand. Thomas is a child, but he won't run. And you've been telling yourself for 8 years that you're a coward. But cowards don't open their doors. Caleb looked at her hand on his. He turned his palm up and closed his fingers around hers. If this goes wrong, then it goes wrong. But those children will know their mother stood. That's worth more than running. Outside, the Wyoming darkness pressed against the windows. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Silas Boone was gathering his men. Somewhere in Cheyenne, a telegram was making its way to a federal marshal, who might or might not come in time. And in a cabin that had been empty for 8 years, a man who had been dead for almost as long felt something he'd forgotten the name for. He didn't let go of her hand. Not for a long time. Caleb woke to the sound of hooves. Not 1 horse, not 3, a column. The ground hummed with it, a low vibration that came up through the floorboards and settled in his teeth. He was on his feet before his eyes fully opened, his hand already on the Colt at his hip. Thomas was already at the window. The boy hadn't slept. Caleb could see it in the bruised hollows under his eyes, in the way he gripped the Winchester like it was the only thing keeping him upright. How many? Caleb said. 8 riders, maybe 9, coming from the East Road. Formation? Spread out, like they're expecting to be shot at. Smart. Caleb moved to the other window. Where's your mother? Root cellar with the children. Clara took them down 10 minutes ago. You were supposed to go with them. Thomas didn't answer that. He didn't need to. They both knew the boy wasn't going underground. Caleb looked at him. 11 years old, rifle in hand, jaw set the way James Harper used to set his, and made a decision he knew he'd either be proud of or dead for. Stay low. Shoot only if they breach the porch. Aim for the center of the body, not the head. You miss a headshot, you don't miss center. Yes, sir. And Thomas. Sir? If I go down, you take your family out the back window and you run north to the Shoshone camp by the creek. Ask for a man called Crow Dog. Tell him Caleb Mercer sent you. You're not going down. That's the plan, but plans are just wishes with boots on. Thomas almost smiled. Almost. The riders pulled up 200 yards from the cabin in a ragged line. Caleb counted them through the window glass. 9 men, 8 on horseback, 1 in a buggy. The buggy told him everything. Silas Boone didn't ride horses anymore. Boone had gotten rich enough to ride in comfort and mean enough to let other men do his bleeding. The buggy was black with brass fittings, the kind of thing a territorial judge or a wealthy rancher would own. It looked obscene out here, too clean, too polished, like a coffin on wheels. Boone stepped down from the buggy. Caleb hadn't seen him in 8 years. The man had thickened but not softened, wide through the shoulders, short-necked, with a face that looked like it had been carved from sandstone by someone who didn't care for beauty. His coat was black, his hat was flat-brimmed, his boots were polished. He walked forward alone, leaving his men behind. A white handkerchief hung from his left hand. "Mercer!" His voice carried across the distance like he was used to being heard. "I come to talk, not fight. Step out." Caleb checked the Colt, checked the second Colt on the table, looked at Thomas. "If he kills me during the talking, empty that Winchester into his men. Start from the left." "Yes, sir." Caleb stepped onto the porch. The heat hit him first, then the silence. The kind of silence that happens when armed men are holding their breath. Boone walked to within 30 yards and stopped. Close enough to talk, far enough to run. "You look terrible, Mercer." "You look rich, Boone. Blood money agrees with you." Boone smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Nothing reached his eyes. They were flat and brown and empty as a dry well. "I don't want trouble with you, Caleb. I respect what you did at Bitter Creek. I respect what you are. So I'm going to make this simple." He spread his hands. "Give me the ledger. I'll pay you $500. I'll ride out. You'll never see me again." "And the woman?" "What woman?" "The one your men roughed up on the Cheyenne Road. The one Crawford locked up to keep your boys from doing worse." Boone's smile faded. "The Harper widow is not your concern. She's standing in my house. That makes her my concern. She's standing in your house because she manipulated you into protecting her. She used you, Mercer, just like James Harper used you at Bitter Creek. You're a shield. That's all you've ever been. Someone else's shield." The words hit. Caleb felt them land. But he'd been carrying worse for 8 years, and words from Silas Boone weighed less than the guilt he already owned. "The ledger's not here," Caleb said. "I think it is." "Then come find it." Boone studied him. "You know what happens if I have to come find it." "I know what happens if you try." 9 guns, Mercer. You've got 1. Maybe 2 if you count the boy I saw in the window. Caleb's blood froze. Boone had seen Thomas. That changed things. "Leave the children out of this." "I'd love to. Give me the ledger, and children won't even be part of the conversation." "And if I don't?" Boone replaced the handkerchief in his pocket. Slowly, deliberately, the way a man closes a book he's finished reading.
Then I burn this cabin to the ground with everything inside it.
And I tell the territorial judge that Caleb Mercer, the Bitter Creek deserter, was harboring stolen government property." He paused. "I hear the penalty for that is hanging. But you won't make it to trial. You're threatening to murder children." "I'm making a business proposition. The murder part is up to you." Caleb stared at the man he'd been hiding from for 8 years. Silas Boone, ex-guerrilla, land thief, killer. The man who'd stolen from widows and orphans and built an empire on forged documents and unmarked graves. And for the first time, Caleb didn't feel fear. He felt something colder, something steadier, something that had been sleeping inside him since Bitter Creek and was finally waking up. "I'll tell you what, Boone. You ride out now. Turn yourself in to the federal marshal in Cheyenne. And maybe you don't hang." Boone laughed. "Federal marshal. That's good, Mercer. You think a telegram from a dirt town sheriff is going to bring the marshals running? I think 47 stolen land claims is going to bring them running." Boone stopped laughing. "I think a dead railroad accountant and his widow's testimony is going to bring them running. I think a duplicate ledger with every forged deed, every falsified death certificate, every stolen homestead documented in a dead man's handwriting is going to bring them at a gallop." "You don't have that ledger." "Don't I?" They stared at each other across 30 yards of dust and heat. Boone turned and walked back to his men. He didn't hurry. He climbed into the buggy, sat down, and took off his hat. He spoke to the rider nearest him, a tall man with a scarred face and a shotgun across his saddle. The rider kicked his horse forward, then the second, then the third. All 9 men moved toward the cabin in a slow line. Caleb stepped inside and slammed the door. "They're coming," Thomas said. "I know. All of them. I know." Caleb grabbed the second Colt from the table and moved to the window. "Shoot the horses first." "What?" "A man on foot is slow. A man on a horse is fast. Shoot the horses." Thomas stared at him. "I can't shoot a horse." "You can, and you will, because your sisters are in that cellar, and those men will not reach them. Do you understand me?" Thomas swallowed. He raised the Winchester. His hands were shaking, but his aim was true. "I understand." The first shot came from outside, a rifle crack that punched a hole through the window frame 2 inches from Caleb's head. Splinters peppered his face. He tasted blood. He fired back. The Colt barked twice, and the lead rider jerked sideways in his saddle. The man didn't fall. The shot had caught his shoulder, but his horse spooked and bolted left, crashing into the rider beside him. Thomas fired. The Winchester boomed in the enclosed cabin, loud enough to rattle Caleb's teeth. The boy had aimed at a horse and hit it in the chest. The animal went down screaming, and the rider flew over its neck and hit the dirt hard enough to stay there. "Good," Caleb said. "Again." Thomas worked the lever and fired again. Missed. Fired again. Another horse staggered. Outside, the riders scattered. They'd expected 1 man with 1 gun. They hadn't expected a Winchester that kept firing. They pulled back and circled, looking for angles. A bullet came through the wall. Not the window, the wall, and buried itself in the kitchen table. Then another. And another. "Down!" Caleb grabbed Thomas and pulled him to the floor. Bullets chewed through the thin cabin walls like they were paper. Wood splinters and dust filled the air. "They're going to shoot through the walls until there's nothing left," Thomas said. "Not if they think the ledger is in here. Boone won't risk destroying it." As if on cue, Boone's voice carried from outside. "Hold fire! Hold fire, you idiots! I need that ledger intact." The shooting stopped. Caleb breathed. Thomas breathed. For a moment, the only sound was the settling of dust and the moaning of the wounded man outside. Then a different sound, from the root cellar beneath them. A child crying. Ruth. The gunfire had woken her, and the baby's wail rose through the floorboards like a ghost. Boone heard it. Children in the cellar, Mercer? That's where you're keeping them? Under the floor like animals? Caleb's stomach turned. Send them out, Boone called. Send the woman and the children out. This is between you and me. It stopped being between you and me when you killed Daniel Harper. Harper was a thief who stole government property. Harper was an accountant who caught you stealing from widows. Send them out, Mercer. Last chance. The cellar door inside the cabin lifted. Evelyn's face appeared, dust-streaked and fierce. Don't you dare send us out, she said. Get back down there. I heard what he said. He'll take the children. He won't touch them. You can't promise that. She climbed out of the cellar. She had Ruth in one arm and Caleb's skinning knife in the other hand. Give me a gun. Evelyn, I said give me a gun, Caleb. He looked at her. This woman who'd walked 11 days through July heat with 5 children, who'd let herself be arrested to protect a dead man's ledger, who'd bet everything on a stranger's conscience. And he pulled the second Colt from his belt and held it out. She took it. She checked the cylinder the way someone who'd been taught once and never forgot would check it. 6 rounds, she said. Make them count. I always do. Thomas was staring at his mother. Something shifted in the boy's face. Pride and terror tangled together so tight they were the same thing. Mama, you should stay with the others. Thomas James Harper. Your father died trying to do the right thing, and I'll be damned if I hide while someone else dies for the same reason. She looked at Caleb. What's the plan? Plan was to hold out until Crawford's telegram reaches the marshal. How long? Could be a day, could be a week. We don't have a week. No, ma'am, we do not. Boone's voice came again, closer now. He'd moved while they were talking. I'm going to count to 50, Mercer. When I reach 50, my men are going to torch this cabin, ledger or no ledger. He's bluffing, Thomas said. He's not, Caleb said. Boone doesn't bluff. He calculates. He's decided the ledger might be worth less than ending this today. Then what do we do? Caleb closed his eyes. He thought about James Harper yelling, "Go!" in the smoke at Bitter Creek. He thought about the letter in his shirt pocket. Be that man. He opened his eyes. I'm going out. No! Evelyn grabbed his arm. I'm going out with a ledger. You don't have the ledger. I hid it at the relay station. Boone doesn't know that. He pulled James Harper's letter from his pocket. He folded it into a square, wrapped it in the oilcloth from his saddlebag, and held it up. He'll know it's not the ledger the second he opens it, Evelyn said. He has to get close to open it. And when he gets close, I only need one shot. That's not a plan. That's a death wish. It's both. He looked at Thomas. If I put Boone down, his men scatter. They're hired guns, not believers. They're not dying for a dead boss. And if you miss? Thomas asked. I won't miss. My father said your father was right about everything except one thing. He thought smart was enough. Sometimes you need stupid, too. Stupid and stubborn and too angry to die. Caleb moved toward the door. Evelyn stepped in front of him. Her eyes were blazing and her chin was set, and the Colt in her hand was pointed at the floor, but her finger was on the trigger. I didn't walk 11 days to watch another good man die on my account. Then don't watch. Caleb Mercer, you listen to me. If you walk out that door alone, you are doing the exact thing you did at Bitter Creek. You are letting someone else sacrifice while you play hero. James ran back because you couldn't.
Daniel died because no one stood with him. If you walk out alone, you're not being brave. You're being selfish. The words hit him harder than any bullet. Because she was right. She was exactly right. He'd spent 8 years calling himself a coward. But the truth was worse. He wasn't a coward. He was a man who'd rather die alone than risk someone else dying beside him. And that wasn't courage. That was pride. "Then what do you suggest?" he said. "I suggest we stop hiding and start fighting." She moved to the window. She looked out at Boone's men, positioned in a rough semicircle around the front of the cabin. "They're all facing front," she said.
"Because the only door is at the front. The root cellar has an exit hatch, 20 yards behind the cabin. It comes up by the water trough." Caleb stared at her. "How do you know that?" "Because Clara found it this morning. She told me there's a wooden hatch covered in dirt. She could see daylight through the cracks. I forgot that hatch existed. Clara didn't." Caleb's mind raced. The water trough, behind the cabin, 20 yards of open ground from the cellar exit to the trough. But the trough was stone, thick enough to stop a bullet. And behind the trough, the trench he dug 3 days ago. If someone came up through that hatch while Boone's men were focused on the front, they'd be behind the entire line. "I need someone at that hatch," Caleb said. "I'll go," Evelyn said. "You can't shoot well enough." "I don't need to shoot well. I need to shoot loud. One shot from behind them and they'll panic. Hired men always panic when they're flanked. And if they don't panic, then I shoot again and again until they do or until I'm empty." Thomas spoke up. "I'll go with her." "No," Evelyn and Caleb said simultaneously. "Mama, you just said we stop hiding. You said—" "I said I fight, not you. You stay with the little ones." "The little ones are in the cellar with the door locked. Clara's got the skinning knife. Samuel's sitting on the hatch. They're safer than any of us." Thomas's voice cracked, but didn't break. "I'm the better shot. You know I am." Evelyn looked at her son, her firstborn, the boy who'd become a man in the worst way possible, by watching his father die. She reached out and touched his face. "Your father would hate this. My father's not here. You are. And I'm not letting you go out there alone." Evelyn's hand dropped. She nodded once. Fast. The way you rip off a bandage. "Cellar hatch. You and me. Caleb holds the front." Caleb handed Thomas 4 extra rounds for the Winchester.
Wait for my first shot. That's your signal. Come up firing."
"Yes, sir." "And Thomas, stay behind the trough, no matter what. That stone will stop anything they're shooting." "Yes, sir." Evelyn and Thomas moved to the cellar entrance. Evelyn climbed down first. Thomas paused at the opening and looked back at Caleb. "Mr. Mercer." "I told you, it's Caleb." "Caleb, don't die." "That's the plan, son." Thomas disappeared into the cellar. Caleb heard their footsteps moving through the dark space below, heading for the back hatch. He heard Clara's voice, sharp, questioning, and Evelyn's reply, too low to make out. Then silence from below. They were in position. Outside, Boone's counting had reached 40. Caleb loaded both Colts. He put one in each hand. He walked to the door and put his shoulder against it. 45. He thought about James Harper, about Daniel Harper, about a letter that said, "Be that man." 48. He thought about 5 children in a cellar, trusting a stranger with their lives. 49. He kicked the door open and stepped into the light. The world slowed down the way it always did before violence. Caleb saw everything at once. The 9 men spread in a half-moon, the horses stamping. Boone standing behind his buggy with a derringer in his hand. The tall, scarred man with the shotgun already raising it. Caleb raised both Colts. He fired the left one first.
The scarred man caught the bullet in the throat and fell backward off his horse without a sound. Then the right. A second rider spun sideways and dropped. Then the world sped up and hell opened. Gunfire from everywhere. Caleb felt a bullet pull at his sleeve like an impatient child. Another cracked past his ear.
He dropped to one knee. The trench. The trench he'd dug 3 days ago was 3 steps to his left, and he threw himself sideways into the shallow ditch as shotgun pellets tore the air where his chest had been. Then, from behind the cabin, the Winchester roared. Thomas. The boy came up from behind the water trough and fired into the back of the line. His first shot hit a horse. His second hit a man in the back. The rider pitched forward over his horse's neck and didn't move. Evelyn fired the Colt. She missed, fired again, missed again. But the sound, a gun behind them where no gun should be, did exactly what she'd predicted. The hired men panicked. 2 of them wheeled their horses and bolted east without looking back. A third fired wildly in Evelyn's direction, and Thomas put a bullet through his leg. 5 down, 2 fled, 2 left. And Boone. Boone hadn't moved. He stood behind his buggy, watching his hired army fall apart, with the cold expression of a man watching an investment fail. Caleb rose from the trench. Blood ran from his sleeve where the bullet had grazed him. He walked toward Boone with both Colts raised. "It's over," Caleb said. The 2 remaining riders looked at Boone, looked at Caleb, looked at each other. They dropped their guns in the dirt and raised their hands. "Smart boys," Caleb said, without looking at them. Boone still hadn't moved. His derringer was at his side. His eyes were calculating. "You won't shoot me, Mercer. You need me alive to clear the widow's claims." "I need the ledger to clear the claims. I don't need you for anything." "Without my testimony, the ledger is just numbers on paper. A good lawyer—" 47 stolen claims, Boone. 47 forged deeds. Every one documented in a dead man's handwriting. No lawyer alive is going to talk you out of that. Boone raised the derringer. Caleb fired. The bullet hit Boone's hand, and the derringer went spinning into the dust. Boone staggered back, gripping his wrist, blood pouring between his fingers. "You shot me." "I aimed for the gun. You got lucky." Boone fell against his buggy, his face twisted, not with pain, but with something uglier. Disbelief. The expression of a man who had spent 10 years believing himself untouchable, and was just now discovering he was made of the same flesh as everyone else. Thomas walked up with a Winchester trained on Boone's chest. The boy's hands weren't shaking anymore. Evelyn came behind him. Her hair was wild, and her dress was torn, and she was bleeding from a cut on her forehead where a wood splinter had caught her. She still held the Colt. She walked straight up to Boone and stood over him. "My husband's name was Daniel Harper," she said. "He was a good man, a quiet man. He couldn't shoot and he couldn't fight, and he was braver than anyone I've ever met. You killed him for a ledger, and that ledger is going to bury you." Boone spat blood. "You'll never find it." "I already found it." Something died in Boone's eyes. Not hope. He'd never had hope. What died was certainty. The certainty that money and guns and cruelty would always be enough. Caleb pulled rope from the barn and tied Boone's hands behind his back. The 2 remaining hired men he tied to the porch rail. The wounded men in the yard he disarmed and left where they lay. Thomas stood guard with the Winchester the entire time. He didn't speak. He didn't waver. He watched Boone the way a hawk watches a snake, with patient, absolute attention. When the cellar door finally opened and Clara emerged, blinking in the harsh light, she took one look at the yard, the fallen horses, the tied men, the blood in the dirt,
and turned to Caleb. "Is it over?" "The shooting part is." "What part isn't?" "The justice part." Clara nodded. She went back into the cellar and came up with Samuel, then Lily, then Ruth.
She carried the baby on one hip and held Lily's hand with the other, walking through the aftermath with the measured steps of someone who refused to be afraid of what she saw. Samuel stared at everything. His mouth hung open. "Samuel," Clara said sharply. He closed his mouth. Lily pressed her face against Clara's leg, but she didn't go silent again. She whispered, "I want Mama." And Clara said, "Mama's right there." And Lily looked up and saw Evelyn standing in the yard with a gun in her hand and blood on her face. And she didn't cry. She walked to her mother and took her hand. Caleb watched all of this from the porch, where Boone sat tied and bleeding. The man who had terrorized a territory, who had stolen from widows and killed an accountant and sent armed men to burn a cabin with children inside, was sitting in the dirt, watching a family he'd tried to destroy walk past him without a glance. Boone looked at Caleb. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is. I have a judge.
I have lawyers. I have connections in Washington. You have 47 counts of land fraud, a murdered federal employee, and 9 witnesses to an armed assault on children. Your judge can't save you. Your lawyers can't save you. And your connections are going to pretend they never heard your name." Boone opened his mouth. "Shut up, Silas." Boone shut up. Caleb sat on the porch step. He hurt in places he hadn't cataloged yet. His sleeve was soaked with blood. His ears were ringing. His hands had stopped shaking, but his chest hadn't. His heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. Evelyn sat beside him. Not close, not touching, but beside him. "You're bleeding," she said. "I know." "Let me see." "It's a graze." "Let me see, Caleb." He let her push up his sleeve. The bullet had carved a furrow along his forearm, deep enough to bleed heavily, shallow enough to heal. She tore a strip from her petticoat and wrapped it tight. "You need stitches," she said.
"I need a drink." "You quit drinking." "I quit drinking 3 days ago. That's not a commitment. That's a streak." She almost laughed. Almost. It came out as a sound between a sob and a breath, and she pressed her forehead against his shoulder for just a moment before pulling away. Thomas appeared. The boy set the Winchester on the porch and sat down on Caleb's other side. The 3 of them sat in a row, a battered man, a bleeding woman, and an 11-year-old with powder burns on his hands, looking out at a yard full of tied men and wounded horses and settling dust. "Caleb," Thomas said. "Yeah?" "I shot a man." "I know." "He was going to hurt Mama." "I know." "I don't feel bad about it." Caleb put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "You don't have to feel bad. You don't have to feel good either. You just have to feel what you feel and keep moving." "Is that what you did after Bitter Creek?" "No. I stopped moving after Bitter Creek. That was my mistake." He squeezed the boy's shoulder. "Don't make my mistakes." Thomas leaned against him, just slightly, just enough. The way a son leans against a father when the fight is over and the fear hasn't left yet, and the only thing that helps is being close to someone who stood with you. Caleb didn't move. He let the boy lean. Ruth crawled across the porch toward them, grabbed Caleb's boot, and pulled herself up to standing. She wobbled. She grinned. She took one step toward him, then another, then fell against his knee. She'd been learning to walk for weeks. She chose this moment to get it right. Caleb picked her up. She grabbed his collar with both fists and pressed her face into his neck. And for the second time in his life, Caleb Mercer held a child who wasn't his, and felt something break open inside him that had been sealed shut for 8 years.
This time, he let it break. The bleeding wouldn't stop. Evelyn had wrapped his arm twice, but the cloth kept soaking through.
Caleb pressed his hand against the wound and felt the warm pulse of blood between his fingers, steady as a heartbeat. And he knew the bullet had gone deeper than he'd told her. "Sit down," Evelyn said. "I'm fine." "You're gray. Sit down before you fall down and scare the children." He sat, not because she told him to, because his legs made the decision for him, buckling at the knee, dropping him into the chair at the kitchen table, hard enough to rattle the tin cups. The cabin swam. He gripped the table edge. Thomas appeared with a pot of water from the pump. Clara was behind him with a sewing needle and thread she'd found in Evelyn's travel bag. "I can stitch it," Clara said. "You're 9 years old." "I stitched Samuel's chin when he fell off the wagon in April. 7 stitches. Didn't even leave a bad scar." She set the needle on the table and looked at him the way a doctor looks at a patient who's about to argue. "Take your shirt off." Caleb looked at Evelyn. Evelyn shrugged. "She's better at it than I am." He pulled his shirt off. The wound was a furrow along his forearm, but at the inner edge it had gone deep, muscle deep, and the blood was coming fast. Clara washed her hands. She threaded the needle. She didn't hesitate. The first stitch went in, and Caleb's jaw clenched hard enough to crack a walnut. He didn't make a sound. Clara pulled the thread through, tied it, and moved to the next one. "Hold still," she said. "I am holding still." "You're shaking." "That's not the same thing." She almost smiled. Almost. She put in the second stitch, then the third. Her hands were small and steady and precise, and she worked with the concentration of someone who understood that this was not a game, and that the man under her needle was holding his breath so he wouldn't frighten her. Thomas watched from the doorway, the Winchester still in his hands. Beyond him, Boone and his surviving men sat tied in the yard. The wounded ones had stopped groaning. The conscious ones sat in silence, watching the cabin with the flat eyes of men who knew they'd lost and were calculating what came next. 7 stitches, Clara announced. She cut the thread with her teeth. "Don't use the arm for 2 days. I'll use it when I need to." "You'll use it in 2 days or you'll tear these stitches, and I'll have to do it again, and I'll be less gentle the second time." Caleb stared at this girl, 9 years old, kneeling on his cabin floor, wiping his blood off her hands with a rag, and felt something that wasn't gratitude and wasn't admiration, but was closer to awe. "You're going to be a terrifying woman someday, Clara Harper." "I'm a terrifying woman now. I'm just short." Evelyn knelt beside him and wrapped clean cloth around the stitches. Her hands lingered on his arm longer than necessary. She didn't look at him. He didn't look at her. But neither of them moved away. "Riders," Thomas said from the door. Caleb was on his feet before the pain caught up. He grabbed the Colt and moved to the window. His arm screamed. He ignored it. "How many?" "2, coming slow. One of them's got a badge." The relief hit Caleb so hard his knees almost buckled again. Crawford. The spineless, sweating, nervous sheriff of Lander had actually come. But Crawford wasn't alone. The man beside him rode a tall black gelding and wore a federal marshal star on his chest. He was lean, weather-beaten, with a gray mustache and the posture of a man who'd spent more years in the saddle than out of it. Caleb knew him instantly. James Redding, federal marshal, Bitter Creek survivor, the only lawman Caleb had ever trusted. Redding pulled up in the yard, surveyed the tied men, the dead horses, the blood in the dirt, and the bullet holes in the cabin walls. Then he looked at Caleb standing in the doorway with a bandaged arm and a Colt in his good hand. "Mercer, you look like hell." "Redding, you're early." Crawford's telegram reached me in South Pass. I was already riding this direction. Got word 3 days ago that Boone was moving heavy into the valley. Redding swung down from his horse. Looks like I'm late, not early. You're right on time, actually. Redding walked to where Boone sat tied against the porch rail. He crouched down and studied the man the way someone studies a bug pinned to a board. Silas Boone, I've been waiting 4 years to meet you. Boone said nothing. His hand was wrapped in a bloody rag, and his face had gone the color of old chalk. I've got warrants for land fraud, forgery, and conspiracy from the territorial court in Cheyenne, Redding said. As of this morning, I've also got a warrant for the murder of Daniel Harper, railroad employee and federal witness. I didn't kill Harper personally. You ordered it. Same thing under territorial law. Same rope. Boone's jaw tightened. I want a lawyer. You'll get one. In Cheyenne. In a federal courtroom. In front of a judge who doesn't owe you money. Redding stood. Crawford, get these men on their feet. We're moving them to town. Crawford dismounted and began untying the hired men with shaking hands. He wouldn't look at Caleb. Shame had a way of making men avoid eye contact. Redding stepped onto the porch and looked at Caleb. Really looked at him. The marshal's eyes were sharp and steady, and they missed nothing. Not the bandaged arm, not the children inside, not the woman standing behind Caleb with a Colt still in her hand. You want to tell me what happened here, Caleb? Boone showed up with 9 men, demanded a ledger that proves he stole land from 47 railroad widows. I said no. He tried to burn my cabin with children inside. We disagreed. That's one way to put it. Redding looked at the yard. How many dead? 1 confirmed. The one with the throat wound. 2 more down. Might not make it. The rest will live to stand trial. And the ledger? Safe, hidden. Evelyn Harper can retrieve it when you're ready. Redding looked past Caleb to Evelyn. He tipped his hat. Mrs. Harper, I'm sorry about your husband. He was doing important work. Evelyn stepped forward. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. My husband died for that ledger, Marshal. I need to know it matters. It matters. I've been building a case against Boone's land operation for 2 years. That ledger is the last piece. With it, every stolen claim gets reversed. Every widow gets her land back. Every one? Every one. Something broke in Evelyn's face. Not grief. She'd already broken for grief. This was something else. Relief so deep it looked like pain. She pressed her hand to her mouth and turned away. Clara appeared at her mother's side and took her hand. No words, just presence. The quiet, steady presence of a child who understood that sometimes adults needed to fall apart, and someone had to be there when they did. Redding took Caleb aside while Crawford loaded the prisoners onto horses. I need the full story, Caleb, not the short version. Everything. So Caleb told him. Bitter Creek, James Harper's sacrifice, the letter, 8 years of silence and drinking, Evelyn's arrival with 5 children, the debt, the ledger, Boone's men on the ridge, the telegram, the fight. Redding listened without interrupting. When Caleb finished, the marshal was quiet for a long time. James Harper was the best man in our unit, Redding said finally. When he went back into that canyon, every one of us knew he wasn't coming out. He did it anyway. I should have gone with him. You'd be dead. Maybe that would have been better. Better for who? Not for those 5 children in there. Not for that woman. Redding put his hand on Caleb's shoulder. James made a choice. He chose to save you. You don't get to decide his choice was wrong just because living with it hurts. Caleb stared at the ground. dirt and blood and boot prints. The evidence of a fight he'd almost lost. I was a coward at Bitter Creek, Jim. You were a soldier following orders. James told you to go. You went. That's not cowardice. That's discipline. It doesn't feel like discipline. Guilt never does. Redding squeezed his shoulder. But you stood today, with a 9-year-old stitching your arm and an 11-year-old covering your flank. You stood. James would have been proud. James would have been furious it took me 8 years. Redding laughed. The first real laugh Caleb had heard in the yard all day. Yeah, he would have. He always was impatient. Crawford led the prisoners out in a line. Boone on a borrowed horse, hands tied to the saddle horn, his face a mask of cold fury. The remaining hired men stumbled along on foot, tied together like a chain gang. As Boone passed the porch, he turned his head and looked at Caleb, then at Evelyn, then at the children gathered in the doorway.
"This isn't finished," Boone said. Thomas stepped forward. He was still holding the Winchester. He looked up at Boone on the horse and said, in a voice that didn't waver, "Yes, it is." Boone stared at the boy. Something flickered in his dead eyes. Not fear, not respect, but recognition. The recognition that the world was changing and men like him were being replaced by boys like this, by women like Evelyn, by broken men like Caleb, who'd finally stopped running. Crawford led them away. The sound of hooves faded. Dust settled. And the ranch was quiet. Not the old quiet. Not the silence of a man drinking alone. This was different. This was the quiet that comes after a storm, when the air is clean and the ground is wet, and everything feels raw and new. Samuel was the first to break it. "Can I have the jerky now?" Clara sighed. "We almost died, and you want jerky." "I was in a cellar for an hour. I'm hungry." "You're always hungry." "I'm 7. That's my job." Caleb went to the root cellar and brought up the last of the salt pork, the dried beans, and a can of peaches he'd been saving for a day that mattered. Today mattered. Evelyn cooked. The children sat around the table, all 5 of them, crammed onto 2 chairs and a barrel and a stack of firewood Clara had arranged into a seat. Ruth sat in Caleb's lap because she refused to sit anywhere else, her fists locked in his collar, her head against his chest. They ate in silence. The good kind. The kind that doesn't need filling. After dinner, Caleb stepped onto the porch. His arm throbbed. His head ached. His body was cataloging every injury it had been too busy to notice during the fight. Bruised ribs from hitting the trench, splinter cuts on his face, a deep ache in his right shoulder from the recoil of firing both Colts. Evelyn followed him out. They stood side by side in the fading heat, watching the sky change color. Neither spoke for a long time. "I need to tell you something," Evelyn said. "All right. When I left the children with you, that first day, I wasn't sure you'd keep them. I almost didn't." "I know. I gambled." She paused. "But not blindly. Daniel told me about you. Not just about Bitter Creek. About before. About the man James described in his letters. James wrote to Daniel about you for years. He said you were the most stubborn, principled, impossible man he'd ever served with. James had a generous memory. James had an accurate memory. He said you once walked 12 miles in a blizzard to return a horse you'd borrowed because you gave your word you'd have it back by Tuesday." Caleb almost laughed. "That was a Tuesday I'll never get back." "He said you shared your rations with a Confederate prisoner because the man was starving, and you said hunger doesn't pick sides." "The prisoner threw the food at me." "But you offered." "I offered." Evelyn turned to face him. "Daniel married me because I was practical.
because I could keep books and manage a household and think 3 steps ahead. He loved me, but he married me because I was useful. And I married him because he was kind, truly kind. The kind of man who notices things, who sees a column of numbers that don't add up and can't sleep until he finds out why. He sounds like a good man. He was the best man I've ever known, her voice caught. And I couldn't save him. I heard the gunshots and I ran. I took the children and I ran. You survived. I abandoned him. You saved 5 children. I left my husband to die. The words hung between them. This was the confession she'd been carrying for 6 weeks, through 11 days of walking, through jail cells and gunfights, and 100 small negotiations with a stranger's conscience. This was the thing beneath the thing. Not the ledger, not the debt, not Boone. This. Evelyn. Don't tell me I did the right thing. I wasn't going to. He turned to face her. I was going to tell you that I know what it feels like to leave someone behind. I know what it costs. And I know that no amount of people telling you it was necessary makes the weight any lighter. Does it ever get lighter? No. But you get stronger. And one day you realize you're carrying it without thinking about it. It's still there. It just doesn't crush you anymore. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, quick, angry at herself for crying. I didn't come here just for protection, Caleb. I could have gone to the marshal myself. I could have mailed the ledger to Washington. There were easier ways. Then why? Because Daniel made me promise. On the road, before I ran, he grabbed my arm and said, "Find Caleb Mercer. James said he's lost. Give him a reason to be found." Caleb stopped breathing. Daniel wasn't just trying to protect us. He was trying to protect you. He knew about the drinking. He knew about the isolation. James had written to him, worried about you, years before Bitter Creek. She looked at him. Your debt wasn't to Daniel. Daniel's debt was to James. And James's debt was to you. James didn't owe me anything. James loved you like a brother, and brothers don't keep score. Caleb sat down on the porch step, hard, like the ground had shifted under him and he needed to get closer to it. I spent 8 years thinking I owed a dead man. Turns out a dead man was trying to save me the whole time. 2 dead men. James sent the letter. Daniel sent me. And what did you send? 5 children and a whole lot of trouble. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. And something passed between them that neither of them named. Something too new and too fragile and too tangled up in grief and gunpowder to call by any word. But it was there, solid as the porch boards under them. The cabin door opened. Clara stood there with Ruth on her hip and an expression that was pure exasperation. Ruth won't sleep. She keeps saying a word, but I can't understand it. Ruth was reaching her arms out toward the porch, straining against Clara's grip, babbling the same syllable over and over. Sa, sa, sa. Evelyn's hand went to her mouth. She's saying your name, Clara said flatly. Or trying to. She's been doing it for 10 minutes, and she won't stop until you take her. Caleb stood. He walked to the door and took Ruth from Clara. The baby immediately stopped fussing, grabbed his collar, and put her head on his shoulder. Sa, she said contentedly. Clara looked at him with an expression that was equal parts accusation and surrender. She doesn't do this with anyone, not even Mama. I don't know why. I do. Clara turned and walked back inside. Over her shoulder, she said, She knows who fought for her. Babies always know. Caleb stood in the doorway, holding a dead man's youngest child, listening to her breathe against his neck.
Thomas appeared from inside.
The boy had finally put down the rifle. He looked smaller without it. Younger. More like the 11-year-old he actually was. "Caleb? Yeah? Are we safe now?"
For tonight. Redding took Boone. The hired men scattered or got arrested. We're safe tonight.
And tomorrow?
Tomorrow we ride to the relay station and get the ledger. We put it in Redding's hands. And then Boone goes to trial and 47 families get their land back.
And then what?
Caleb looked at the boy, then at Evelyn on the porch, then at Clara inside the cabin, already washing dishes, at Samuel, asleep on the floor with his boots still on, at Lily, curled against a pillow, her thumb in her mouth, her eyes open and watching everything. "I don't know," Caleb said. "I haven't thought past tomorrow in 8 years."
"Maybe you should start."
"Maybe I should." Thomas nodded.
He walked to his spot on the porch, the same spot where he'd stood guard for 4 days with a rifle across his knees, and sat down. But this time he didn't pick up the Winchester. He just sat. A boy on a porch, looking at the sky. Caleb carried Ruth inside and laid her on the cot beside Lily. The baby didn't let go of his collar at first. He had to gently pry her fingers loose, one by one, and each tiny finger releasing felt like something he didn't have words for. He covered both girls with a blanket. Evelyn stood in the doorway watching him. "You're good at that," she said quietly. "At what?" "Being gentle. For a man who spent 8 years alone, you're remarkably gentle."
"I wasn't alone by choice. I was alone by cowardice."
"You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means."
"It means I ran when I should have stood."
"It means you survived when you could have died."
And because you survived, you were here when 5 children needed someone to stand for them. She crossed her arms.
"Stop punishing yourself, Caleb. The world's done enough of that."
He looked at her across the cabin. This woman who'd buried a husband and walked across a territory and outmaneuvered a land thief and fired a gun she could barely aim and still had enough fight left in her to argue with him about the definition of cowardice. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he said.
"I'm the most stubborn woman you'll ever meet. Get used to it."
He sat at the table. She sat across from him. The lamp between them burned low, casting long shadows.
"When this is over," she said, "when the trial is done and the land is returned and Boone is in prison, what happens to us?"
"What do you mean?"
"I mean 5 children and a widow in a one-room cabin with a man they've known for a week."
What does that look like in a month? In a year? It looks like whatever you want it to look like. What do you want it to look like? Caleb was quiet for a long time. Outside, the last heat of the day surrendered to cool dark. A coyote called somewhere in the distance. Another answered. "I want it to look like this table with more chairs," he said finally. "And this cabin with more rooms. And that porch with Clara reading a book and Samuel getting into trouble. And Thomas pretending he's not smiling. And Lily talking again. And Ruth walking without falling." He paused. "And you, sitting across from me, telling me I'm wrong about something."
Evelyn's eyes glistened. She didn't wipe them this time. "That's a lot of wanting for a man who claims he doesn't think past tomorrow."
"I'm working on it."
She reached across the table and took his hand, the same way she'd done the night before.
But this time, she interlaced her fingers with his, and this time, neither of them pretended it was casual. "We barely know each other," she said.
"We know the important parts."
"What are the important parts?"
"You don't run, I don't quit. And your children are sleeping 10 feet away from us, and not one of them is afraid." Her fingers tightened on his.
"That's enough," she said. "For now, that's enough." They sat at the table, holding hands while 5 children slept around them, while the lamp burned down, while the Wyoming darkness wrapped around the cabin like a blanket. While somewhere in Lander, a man named Silas Boone sat in a jail cell, realizing for the first time that he was going to lose everything. Caleb didn't let go of her hand, not for a long time. Morning came, and Caleb couldn't move his arm. The stitches held. Clara's work was clean and tight, but the flesh around them had swollen overnight, hot to the touch, and when he tried to flex his fingers, the pain went from his wrist to his shoulder like a lit fuse. Evelyn found him sitting on the porch trying to button his shirt one-handed, swearing under his breath. "Let me," she said. "I can do it." "You can't even reach the second button." She stood in front of him and buttoned his shirt, starting at the bottom, working up. Her fingers brushed his chest through the fabric, and neither of them acknowledged it, and neither of them pretended it didn't happen. "We need to ride to the relay station today," Caleb said. "Redding wants the ledger before the arraignment." "I know where it is. I can go alone." "You're not going alone." "Caleb." "Last time you went alone, you ended up in a jail cell with a split lip. You're not going alone." She finished the last button. Her hand stayed on his collar for a moment longer than necessary. "Fine, but I'm riding Dutch. You can barely sit up straight." "I'll take the mule." "We don't have a mule." "Hector Doyle owes me a mule. He owes me $14, but I'll take a mule." Thomas appeared in the doorway. He'd heard everything. The boy always heard everything. "I'll stay with the others," Thomas said. Caleb looked at him. The boy's face had changed in the last week. Not aged exactly, but sharpened. The softness of childhood was still there in his cheeks, his mouth, the way his hair fell in his eyes. But his jaw had hardened and his eyes had steadied, and he held himself like someone who had learned the weight of responsibility and decided to carry it anyway. "You sure?" Caleb asked. "Clara and I can handle it. Samuel's more trouble than Boone's men, but we'll manage." Clara's voice floated from inside the cabin. "I heard that." "You were supposed to," Thomas called back. Caleb rode to Hector's place on Dutch, while Evelyn stayed with the children. Hector didn't have a mule. He had a sway-backed mare named Patience, who lived up to her name by refusing to move faster than a walk, no matter how hard a man kicked. "She's slow," Hector admitted. "She's breathing, that's enough." "Mercer." Hector shifted his weight. "I heard about the fight. The whole town heard. Willis at the saloon is telling everyone you took on 9 men with a widow and a child." "Willis talks too much." "He's also saying Crawford sent the telegram. That Redding came. That Boone's in custody." Hector rubbed the back of his neck. "People are talking, Mercer. Not the way they used to. Not, 'That's the Bitter Creek drunk.' Something different." "I don't care what people say." "You should, because some of those people are starting to say they should have helped." He paused. "Mrs. Callahan from the dry goods store, the old woman who gave your lady the food. She went to Crawford's office yesterday and gave a statement. Said she saw Boone's men threaten a farmer 2 years ago. Took his land. She never said anything before because she was scared." "One statement won't matter." "It's not one. It's 11. 11 people walked into Crawford's office yesterday and gave statements against Boone. Farmers, shop owners, a school teacher, even Willis." Hector looked at Caleb. "You cracked it open, Mercer. Whatever dam was holding this town's silence, you cracked it." Caleb took the mare and rode back without answering. But Hector's words stayed with him, turning over in his mind like a stone in a creek bed. He and Evelyn rode out an hour later, south, toward the old relay station at the base of the pass. Evelyn led on Dutch. Caleb followed on Patience, who lived up to her name with punishing consistency.
They rode in silence for the first mile. Then Evelyn spoke.
I want to tell you about the night Daniel died. Caleb didn't answer. He waited. We were camped by the road. The children were asleep in the wagon. Daniel was going over the ledger one more time. He always went over things one more time. That was who he was. And he looked up and said, Evelyn, I think we should turn back. Why didn't you? Because I told him we'd come too far. I told him the marshal was 2 days' ride away, and we'd be safe once we got there. Her voice was flat, but her hands were tight on the reins. I was wrong. The riders came that night. 3 of them. They surrounded the wagon. You don't have to tell me this. I do, because you need to know what Daniel did. She took a breath. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He stood up in that wagon and he said, My wife and children are sleeping. Whatever you want, you deal with me. And they pulled him off the wagon and they asked him where the ledger was, and he said, I burned it. He lied. He looked them in the eye and lied, because he knew if he told the truth, they'd search the wagon and find the children. Did they believe him? No, but it bought time. Enough time for me to get the children out the back of the wagon and into the trees. She paused. I heard what they did to him, trying to make him talk. He never talked. He never made a sound. And when I heard the gunshot, she stopped. The horse walked on. The silence filled with everything she couldn't say. He made a sound, she whispered. At the very end, he said my name. Caleb pulled Patience alongside Dutch and reached across the gap between them. He took Evelyn's hand. She gripped his fingers so hard he felt the bones shift. He was the bravest man I ever met, she said. And I spent 6 weeks telling myself he was foolish, that he should have given them the ledger, that numbers on paper weren't worth dying for. Were they? 47 families, Caleb. 47 women who lost their husbands and then lost their land. Women with children. Women like me. She wiped her face with her free hand. Yes, they were worth dying for. Daniel knew it. I just needed time to catch up. They reached the relay station by midday. It was abandoned, had been for years. Just a collapsed roof and a stone chimney, and a row of fence posts leaning at drunken angles. Evelyn dismounted and walked to the 3rd fence post from the north end. She knelt in the dirt and dug with her bare hands. 6 inches down, she pulled out an oilcloth package the size of a Bible. She held it up. 47 families, she said. Caleb took it from her and opened it. Inside was a leather-bound ledger filled with columns of numbers in precise, careful handwriting. Names, dates, parcel numbers, claim references. Every entry cross-referenced, annotated, verified. The work of a meticulous man who understood that details mattered and truth required documentation. Daniel Harper's handwriting. His monument. His weapon. This is enough to put Boone away for 20 years, Caleb said. I want him to hang. That's not up to us. No, but I want it. He didn't argue. He wrapped the ledger back in the oilcloth and put it inside his shirt, against his chest, where he could feel it against his heartbeat. They rode back faster than they'd come. Patience finally decided to live up to a different name and broke into a reluctant canter. Caleb's arms screamed with every stride, but he didn't slow down. When they reached the ranch, Thomas was waiting on the porch, but he wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him, 60, maybe older, in a faded dress and a sunbonnet that had seen better decades. She was leaning on a walking stick, and her face had the kind of wrinkles that come from squinting into wind for a lifetime. Someone here to see you, Thomas said. Something in his voice, careful, controlled, the way he spoke when things mattered. The woman stepped forward. Her eyes went to Caleb, then to Evelyn, then back to Caleb.
You Mercer? Yes, ma'am. I'm Martha Aldridge. My husband William laid track for the Union Pacific. Died in a tunnel collapse in '68. I had a homestead claim, 160 acres, government issued, signed by the territorial governor. Ma'am, Silas Boone took it, showed up with a document that said my husband had sold the claim before he died. William never sold anything. He couldn't write his own name. Her voice shook, but didn't break. I've been living in a boarding house in Lander for 7 years, working as a laundress. That land was mine. Caleb pulled the oilcloth package from his shirt. What was your husband's name again? William Aldridge. He opened the ledger and turned pages. Evelyn looked over his shoulder. Halfway through, she pointed. There, Aldridge, William J. Parcel 417, 160 acres, South Fork of the Wind River.
Claim transferred to Boone Land Company, April 1869. Signature marked with an X. Evelyn looked at Martha.
You said your husband couldn't write? He couldn't. This document shows he signed with an X. But Daniel's notes say the original claim was signed with a full signature, forged by someone in the land office.
Evelyn's eyes hardened.
They forged your husband's name, Mrs. Aldridge. Then they filed a transfer they knew he couldn't contest, because he was already dead.
Martha's walking stick trembled. Her eyes filled. But she didn't cry. She was a woman who had been cheated out of her home 7 years ago, and had spent every day since then doing other people's laundry in a town that knew she'd been robbed and did nothing. Crying wasn't what she needed. Justice was.
Am I getting my land back? She asked.
Caleb looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Caleb. Yes, ma'am, he said. You're getting your land back. Martha Aldridge nodded. She reached out and gripped Caleb's good hand with both of hers. Strong hands. Rough hands. Hands that had wrung out sheets and scrubbed floors for 7 years because a man with money had stolen everything she'd earned.
Thank you,
she said. Don't thank me. Thank Daniel Harper.
I'll thank a dead man at his grave when I'm standing on my own land.
She turned and walked back toward the road. Thomas watched her go. There were 2 more before her, the boy said. What? 2 more women came while you were gone. Widow named Sarah Pratt and another named Josephine Turley. Both lost land to Boone. Both heard about the fight. Both came to see if it was true, that somebody finally stood up to him. What did you tell them? I told them to come back tomorrow, that we'd have the proof. Caleb looked at his 11-year-old, this boy who'd been on his porch for a week and had already started speaking for him, making promises on his behalf, handling strangers with the diplomatic skill of someone 4 times his age. You told them to come back, Caleb repeated. Was I wrong? No, you weren't wrong.
Caleb?
Yeah?
Samuel ate the rest of the peaches.
Of course he did. They rode to Lander the next morning, all of them. Caleb on Patience, Evelyn on Dutch with Ruth in her lap, Thomas walking, Clara walking, Samuel riding on Thomas's shoulders for the first mile before Thomas set him down and told him his legs worked fine. Lily walked beside Evelyn's horse. She hadn't spoken much since her first word 4 days ago, but she was speaking now. Small sentences, quiet observations.
Bird, she said, pointing.
That's a hawk, Clara corrected.
Big bird.
It's a hawk, Lily.
Big bird hawk.
Clara sighed. Caleb smiled.
Actually smiled.
Not almost, not nearly, but the real thing, pulling at muscles in his face that had gone stiff from disuse. Thomas saw it. The boy didn't say anything, but he straightened up a little, walked a little taller, the way a son does when he sees his father happy and doesn't want to jinx it.
Lander looked different. Or maybe Caleb was different. He couldn't tell. The same false front buildings, the same packed dirt street, the same saloon and general store and crooked church steeple. But people came out. They stood on porches and in doorways and watched the strange procession. A battered rancher, a sunburned widow, and 5 children walking into town like they owned it. Nobody whispered this time. Nobody pointed and murmured about the Bitter Creek drunk. Mrs. Callahan from the dry goods store stepped off her porch and handed Clara a peppermint stick. Clara took it, broke it into 5 pieces, and gave the biggest piece to Samuel.
"You didn't have to do that," Samuel said with his mouth already full. "Yes, I did. You're impossible when you're hungry." Willis came out of the saloon and tipped his hat to Evelyn. "Ma'am?"
"Sir?"
"Drinks are on me if you need 'em."
"I don't drink," Evelyn said.
"Coffee, then." Caleb tied the horses outside the marshal's office. Redding was inside, sitting behind Crawford's desk. Crawford was nowhere to be seen. "Crawford resigned this morning," Redding said before Caleb could ask. "Said he couldn't live with himself. I told him that was the first honest thing he'd said in years."
"He helped in the end."
"He did. I'll remember that. But the town needs a real sheriff." Caleb set the oilcloth package on the desk. Redding unwrapped it with careful hands, opened the ledger, and began turning pages. His expression changed as he read, from professional interest to quiet fury. "This is everything," Redding said. "Names, dates, parcel numbers, forged signatures, transfer documents. Daniel Harper didn't just copy records. He built a case. This is prosecutorial-grade evidence." "Will it hold in court?" "It'll hold in any court in the territory. And when I send copies to Washington, it'll hold there, too." Redding looked up. "Boone is going to trial. His land company is going to be dissolved, and every stolen claim is going to be reversed." "How long?" "Weeks for the arrest and arraignment, months for the full trial. But the injunctions on the stolen land can be filed immediately. By next month, those widows will have legal claim to their property again." Evelyn sat in the chair across from Redding and leaned forward. "I want to testify." "I was hoping you'd say that." "I want every detail of what happened to Daniel on the record. I want the court to know who he was and what he did and why he did it." "Mrs. Harper, your testimony will be the centerpiece of the prosecution." "Good." She sat back. "And I want his name cleared. Daniel was labeled a thief by Boone's people. They told everyone he stole government property. I want the court record to show he was a whistleblower, not a criminal." "That's exactly what he was, and that's exactly what the record will show." Thomas stood by the window, watching the street. He turned. "Marshal, what about us?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, where do we go? We've been living in Mr. Mercer's cabin for a week. It's 1 room. There are 7 of us." Redding looked at Caleb. "Thomas raises a fair point." "Thomas raises a lot of points. It's a habit. The territorial government has a fund for families displaced by land fraud. Mrs. Harper qualifies. There's enough for temporary housing, supplies, and a small stipend while the case proceeds." "We don't need a stipend," Evelyn said. "We need a home." "The Aldridge land, Martha Aldridge's 160 acres, is adjacent to Caleb's property," Redding said. "When her claim is restored, there'll be room in this valley for—" "She doesn't need my permission to reclaim her land," Caleb said. "No, but she might need a neighbor who knows how to build a fence." Caleb looked at Evelyn. She looked at him. "I know how to build a fence," Caleb said. "I know how to build a house," Evelyn said. "Since when?" "Since my father was a carpenter in Ohio, and I spent 16 years handing him nails." Clara appeared beside her mother. "I can do windows. Papa taught me to set glass." Samuel pushed in. "I can carry stuff.
You can eat stuff, Clara muttered. That's also important. Redding laughed. He stood and extended his hand to Caleb. You did good, Mercer. James would be proud. James would be impatient. James was always impatient. Redding shook his hand firmly. Take care of this family, Caleb. They've earned a good man. They've earned better than me. Let them decide that. They walked out of the marshal's office into sunlight.
The street was more crowded now. Word had spread. People were coming from farms and ranches across the valley, not to gawk, not to whisper, but to see, to witness, to be part of whatever was happening. Martha Aldridge was waiting outside. Beside her stood two other women, Sarah Pratt and Josephine Turley, the widows Thomas had spoken to the day before. Behind them, 4 more women Caleb didn't recognize. Each one held a piece of paper. Land claims, stolen deeds, evidence of lives dismantled by a man who'd just been locked in a cell. Martha stepped forward. Is it true? Is the ledger in the marshal's hands? It's true, Evelyn said. And Boone? Arraignment next week. Trial within months. Martha turned to the women behind her. She didn't need to say anything. Their faces said everything. Relief and grief and fury and hope. All tangled together, all arriving at once after years of silence and fear. Sarah Pratt, a thin woman with gray hair and shaking hands, stepped forward and looked at Evelyn. My husband died in '69. Boone took our farm in '70. I've been living with my sister's family in a room the size of a closet for 4 years. She pressed her claim paper into Evelyn's hands. Your husband saved this. You tell me his name. Daniel Harper. I'll remember it. So will the court. One by one, the women came forward, each with a story, each with a stolen claim, each with years of silence that ended today on a dusty street in Lander, because a quiet accountant had copied a ledger and a broken rancher had opened his door. Caleb stood apart from the group and watched. Evelyn moved among the women, collecting their papers, writing down their names, organizing their claims with the efficiency of a woman who had married an accountant and learned his skills. Clara helped. Thomas helped. Even Samuel helped, carrying papers back and forth with the self-importance of a 7-year-old who'd been given a task. Lily stood beside Caleb and held his hand. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. Home? She said. Yeah, Caleb said. Home. They rode back to the ranch as the afternoon cooled. The same road they'd traveled so many times in the last week. But this time it felt different. Lighter. Like the land itself had exhaled. At the ranch, Caleb dismounted and stood in the yard, looking at his cabin. 1 room, 1 door, 1 window. A man's fortress against a world he didn't want to be part of. It wasn't enough anymore. We need more rooms, he said. We need more everything, Evelyn said, climbing down from Dutch with Ruth in her arms. More chairs, more beds, more cups. You had 3 cups, Caleb. 3 cups for a grown man living alone. I only have 1 mouth. You have 7 mouths now. He looked at her. She looked at him. The words hung between them. 7 mouths, 7 people. A family assembled from grief and necessity and something else. Something that had grown so quietly over the past week that neither of them had heard it until it was already strong enough to bear weight. Evelyn? Yes? I'm not good at this. At what? Any of it. Talking, feeling, being around people. I spent 8 years learning how to be alone, and I was good at it. You were terrible at it. You were miserable and drunk and living in a cabin with 3 cups. I'm saying I don't know how to do this. Neither do I. My husband's been dead 6 weeks, and I'm standing in the yard of a man I've known for 7 days, talking about building rooms." She shifted Ruth on her hip. "But I know this. Daniel sent me to you because he believed you were worth finding. James believed it too. And I've watched you hold my baby and teach my son and feed my children and take a bullet for people you didn't owe anything to."
So I believe it. You don't know me. I know everything that matters. Thomas walked past them carrying the Winchester, heading for the porch. Without breaking stride, he said, "Just say yes, Caleb." Clara followed, carrying Lily. "He's right. Say yes." Samuel brought up the rear, a peppermint stick hanging from his mouth. "Say yes to what? I missed it." "Everything," Clara said. "He's saying yes to everything." Caleb looked at the parade of children filing into his cabin, which had been quiet for 8 years and would never be quiet again. "I didn't say yes," he called after them. "You didn't say no," Thomas called back. "That's the same thing." Evelyn smiled, the first full smile Caleb had seen from her. Not guarded, not controlled, not strategic. Real. It changed her face entirely. It made her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with appearance, and everything to do with the fact that she was standing in front of him, choosing hope over grief, choosing forward over backward, choosing this damaged, stubborn man with his 3 cups and his 1-room cabin and his 8 years of guilt. "Stay," Caleb said. "Is that an offer or a question?" "It's both." "Then yes to both." He reached out and took her free hand. Ruth grabbed his finger with one fist and Evelyn's collar with the other, linking the 3 of them in a chain of tiny iron fingers. "She's not letting go," Evelyn said. "Neither am I." 2 weeks later, Caleb Mercer put up the first wall of a new room. Thomas held the beam while Caleb nailed it. Clara handed up boards with the precision of a surgical assistant. Samuel carried nails in a bucket and only spilled them twice. Lily sat on the porch and counted hammer blows. Ruth sat in a wooden crate Caleb had padded with blankets, watching everything with wide brown eyes and both fists wrapped around a wooden spoon she'd stolen from the kitchen. Evelyn drew the plans, measured the angles, corrected Caleb's math twice. "It's off by 2 inches, she said. "It's close enough." My father would say close enough is the distance between a house and a pile of lumber. Your father sounds like a difficult man. He was a precise man. There's a difference. The new room wasn't fancy. 4 walls, a plank floor, a window Clara set herself with steady hands and putty she'd mixed from materials Hector Doyle donated, along with the $14 he'd owed, delivered in a sealed envelope with a note that said, "We're square." Martha Aldridge came by with her walking stick and a basket of fresh bread. She stood in the yard and looked at the cabin growing room by room. "That's crooked," she said, pointing at the roofline. "I know. My William could have fixed that in an hour." "Your William was a better builder than me." "My William was a better everything than most men." She set the bread on the porch. "But you'll do." By the 3rd week, the cabin had 2 new rooms, a covered porch extension, and a table Caleb built from salvaged barnwood that sat 7. 7 chairs, 7 cups, 7 plates Evelyn bought in Lander with money from the Territorial Fund. 7. The trial was set for autumn. Redding sent word that the federal prosecutor in Cheyenne had reviewed the ledger and called it the most comprehensive fraud case in territorial history. 47 claims would be reversed. Boone's land company would be dissolved. His assets would be seized and redistributed. 11 people from Lander had given statements, then 23, then 31. A dam had cracked and the truth was flooding through. Crawford, the resigned sheriff, came to the ranch one afternoon. He stood in the yard with his hat in his hands, unable to look Caleb in the eye.
I came to apologize. All right. I should have stood up to Boone years ago. I should have helped those women. I should have been braver. You sent the telegram, Crawford. When it mattered, you sent the telegram. That was the least I could do. Sometimes the least is enough. Crawford looked at the cabin, at the new rooms, at the children playing in the yard, Samuel chasing Clara, Clara dodging easily, Lily clapping her hands, Thomas sitting on the porch, pretending to read, but actually watching everything with those steady eyes. The town's talking about a new sheriff, Crawford said. They're talking about you. I'm not a lawman. You're the closest thing this valley has to one. Tell them no. I did. They said to ask you anyway. Tell them no again. Crawford put his hat on and turned to go. Then he stopped. Mercer, that woman in there, the Harper widow. She's the strongest person I've ever met. And I've been around a long time. I know. Don't let her down. I don't intend to. Crawford rode away. Thomas looked up from his book. You should take the sheriff job. No. Why not? Because I've got a roof to finish, and a fence to rebuild, and 5 children who eat more than any 5 humans in the history of Wyoming territory. Those aren't reasons. Those are the only reasons that matter. Thomas went back to his book, but he was smiling. That night, after dinner, after dishes, after Samuel's bedtime argument and Lily's whispered goodnight, and Clara's final check of every door and window, and Ruth's refusal to sleep anywhere except pressed against Caleb's chest, after all of it, Caleb sat on the porch. Evelyn came out and sat beside him. Close this time, shoulder to shoulder. The kind of close that wasn't accidental and wasn't uncertain. The prosecutor wants me in Cheyenne by September, she said. I know. It could take weeks, the trial. I know. The children can't come. It's no place for them. They'll stay here, with me. She turned her head and looked at him. You'll have 5 children alone for weeks. I've had 5 children for 3 weeks already. With my help. Clara runs this household, and we both know it. I just do what she tells me. Evelyn laughed, quietly, so she wouldn't wake the children. But it was real and full, and it vibrated through her shoulder into his. Caleb. Yeah? I want to say something, and I need you to not make a joke. I can't promise that. Try. He turned to face her. She was looking at him with those eyes, the ones that had stopped asking permission long before she'd walked onto his porch, but softer now. The hardness that had kept her alive for 6 weeks had given way to something else. Trust. The most dangerous thing a person can offer another person. Daniel was the love of my life, she said. He gave me 5 children and 10 years and a world that made sense. And when he died, I thought that was the end of it. I thought love was something I'd used up, like a resource, like you only get one supply, and when it's gone, it's gone. Evelyn, I'm not done. She took his hand. I was wrong. It's not a resource. It's a well. And losing Daniel didn't dry it up. It broke me open. And I spent 6 weeks thinking the breaking was the end. But it wasn't. It was the beginning. Because broken things let in what wasn't there before. What's there now? You. This porch. Those children sleeping inside a house that's growing rooms. Because a man who thought he had nothing left decided to build something. I'm building a house, Evelyn. Don't make it poetry. You're building a family, and you know it. He did know it. He'd known it since the first night, when Ruth grabbed his collar and wouldn't let go. He'd known it since Clara stitched his arm, and Thomas called him by name, and Samuel asked for jerky in the middle of a gunfight, and Lily said Mama for the first time in weeks, and Evelyn held his hand across a table and said, That's enough.
He knew. "I'm not Daniel," he said. "I'm not asking you to be. I'm broken in ways that won't heal. So am I. So are those children. Broken things can still hold together if they're held right." He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. They stayed like that, foreheads touching, breath mingling, hands clasped, for a long time. "Stay," he whispered. "I already said yes." "Say it again." "Yes." "Again." "Yes, Caleb Mercer. I'm staying. The children are staying. We're all staying. And you're going to finish that roof and build 2 more rooms and buy more cups, because 3 was pathetic, and 7 isn't enough, because Martha Aldridge is coming for dinner on Sunday." He kissed her. He hadn't kissed anyone in years.
He'd forgotten how it worked, or thought he had. But it turned out kissing was like riding a horse. The body remembers, even when the mind forgets. She kissed him back, hard. The way a woman kisses when she's decided something and doesn't want there to be any confusion about it. When they pulled apart, Ruth's voice came from inside the cabin. "Sa, sa, sa." "She's awake," Evelyn said. "She's always awake. She wants you. She always wants me." He went inside and picked up the baby. Ruth grabbed his collar with both fists and put her head on his shoulder. Caleb stood in the center of a cabin that now had 3 rooms and 7 chairs and 7 cups and a table big enough for a family. He held a child who wasn't his by blood, but was his by every measure that mattered. By choice, by sacrifice, by the simple act of opening a door when the world said to keep it shut. Thomas was asleep on the porch he'd guarded for a week. Clara was asleep by the door she always watched. Samuel was sprawled across his cot with his boots on, as always. Lily was curled in a ball with her thumb in her mouth, dreaming whatever 5-year-olds dream when the world finally stops being frightening. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching him hold her daughter. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "You paid the debt." He looked at her, then at the children, then at the letter still folded in his shirt pocket. James Harper's handwriting, faded now, the words he'd carried since the day Evelyn arrived. Be that man. He was that man. Not because he'd won a fight, or saved a family, or stood in a doorway when riders came, but because he'd opened a door. Because he'd cooked eggs for a 9-year-old and given a rifle to an 11-year-old and held a baby who grabbed his collar and wouldn't let go. Because he'd poured whiskey on the floor and sat in the dark listening to children breathe and decided, without knowing he was deciding, that silence wasn't the same as peace and solitude wasn't the same as safety, and the only debt worth paying was the one that made you become someone worth being. Ruth's breathing slowed against his neck. Her grip loosened. She was asleep. Caleb Mercer held that child in the center of a home he'd built with his own hands, surrounded by a family he'd never expected and didn't deserve, and would defend with every broken piece of himself for as long as he had breath. Fatherhood is not blood. It is the door you open when every instinct tells you to keep it shut. It is the hand you offer when you have nothing left to give. It is standing in the gap between danger and the ones who cannot fight, and choosing, every single day, to be the man someone believed you could be. Caleb Mercer was that man, and he was home.